I don't think anybody today would question the notion of subjectivity. That there is a core of self that is a core of subjectivity. The kinds of questions that have emerged in modernity about that core of subjectivity is its continuity. And in fact, it was John Locke who first raised that problem, precisely because the self is constantly changing. The self is a bundle of different impressions at each time. What is it that links it? And Locke's answer was memory. The thing that makes us unified people is our memories. And that answer was sufficient for a very long time until the 20th century, and it stopped being sufficient for psychological reasons. Because in addition to continuity of memory, there's the question of, am I the same self if I've changed my values? Am I the same self if I've changed my body, if I've had a sex change operation? Am I the same self if I've changed my nationality or my beliefs? And so it raised the question of identity different from the one that Locke was asking. It's a question of, is there a continuity of self-definition, of substantive self? Not in the sense of essence. Locke got rid of that forever. But it's not enough to say, I remember having done something. There are those who argue, Marcel Proust was very interesting in this regard. He said, yes, because people can remember having made promises, we can feel a sense of obligation, even though we're no longer the same people that we were, to fulfill those promises, because there's that continuity of memory. But for Proust, the real question was, what kind of continuity is there if I'm passionately in love, and that love consumes my life, and all of a sudden, at some point in my life, I can't understand the self that loved that person before. I'm no longer that self. That love doesn't exist anymore. And that's the question of identity that bedeviled him. That's the fragmentation you were asking about, that we are capable of losing identity. And that's when the question of identity in that sense of self-definition first arose in the 1920s when people started to question all of the substantive identities that they had taken for granted before: bourgeois morality, nationalism, gender, and so on. And the odd thing about it is that the question of identity emerged in questioning the possibility of identity, which is followed almost immediately by Erik Erikson, the psychoanalyst, who first puts the question of identity on the agenda as a psychological issue and argues that people have to have a substantive sense of self-definition, a core identity, in order for them to be able to function psychologically and socially. So now you have two opposite poles. You have writers and philosophers questioning the substantiality of identity, and you have psychologists who say we can't get along without it. And that debate goes on today between postmodernists, for example, on the one hand, and people who argue, as Raymond suggests, you can't get along socially without a set of roles, of identity roles, but you can't get along psychologically either without that.